Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome to the Unexplained World with Edward Shanahan. That's me. And the lady to my right, left on your screen is Annette. Hello, Annette.
Hello.
Happy early morning Sunday. um,
Feels like spring outside. It's a good day.
yes. And our guest today is Mr. James Austin. He's the administrator on Facebook of Catholic Witches. We interviewed him already, and a very Annette loved it, I believe.
Very
And
knowledgeable.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that amazes me at the age of 26, man. That was, um, dude's done some good reading. He's a great guy, and we'll have him on in the future. So we'll go right to that. After this, next show we'll have on will be about conspiracies being reality, and some interesting guests. But with this, it's Catholic magic and Catholic witches will be discussed, and the Catholic Church and its ties to it. Okay, the Catholic religion and Catholic witches and magic. So that'll be right after this commercial because we got to pay the bills. Annette, hang in there, and we'll be back. Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome back from the commercial we just had. And we do have our guest today, Mr. James Austin of Catholic Witches on Facebook. And it's a page or a group, I would say, right? James, would you say that?
It's a group, yeah.
Okay. James is from the UK. And first of all, let me ask, and we do have questions for you, James. But let's the first question be what is Catholic Witches?
Well, it was a place, it wasn't actually founded by me, but it was meant to be an island of sorts for people whose spirituality was moving outside the confines of the regular church to all gather and meet, because there were many groups of Christian witches. But what the founder noticed, and something I do still see today, is that most of them don't really allow Catholic content, or they're very antagonistic. So he founded this island called Catholic Witches. I took over the admin when he had to go away, and I try and see it as a place where anyone who believes that there remain magical properties in the natural world and holds to some core doctrines of the Catholic faith can gather. I mean, we don't favour a really strict view. There are three main types of people you get there. One is the one who specialises in folk magic from various Catholic countries. Others will be sticking to the medieval grimoire tradition, which is more my kind of thing. That's the kind of magic I practice myself. And others will be blending. They use the term blending a lot, where they will take things from New Age paganism or other New Age spiritualities and blend them with Catholicism. Now, most of those, there's a lot of overlap between them because a lot of the sources are the same. But if you actually join the group, those are the three main types of people you'll find. And all of them are welcome because they've got very few other places to go, really. There's a place for them all to gather, hang out, share ideas, learn things, and go in their craft.
Annette, go ahead. You're a diehard pagan who went, what was it, 12 years of Catholic schooling?
Yes, it was. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I grew
If
up
not
Catholic.
more, did you go to Catholic college too, or no? Annette?
No, I
Okay.
avoided that one somehow.
Okay.
Art school is not really like a Catholic thing or business school. I was kind of all over with university. But yeah, so I grew up as a Catholic in suburban Chicago. And by the time I was about 20 to 25, I knew that there was a way that I was going to have to make a little shift. I wanted to take a lot of the great ideas that I had from childhood through religion and kind of give it the spin into paganism. So yeah, we started a coven when I was probably 25, and here I am 30 years later. I was just talking to my son last night about the fact, wow, it's been 30 years, because he's kind of coming into his own now with his own ideas. That's how I raised him without having to, have such a regimen.
Now,
So-
James, is there? You guys are somewhat looser, I would imagine, right? Than the
Yes,
Die
yeah.
Hard.
Even if we didn't want to be, there's just so much variation in what the label covers. We have to be very loose.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And I'm just wondering, Annette, do you think this is a great concept?
Oh, I think it's a fabulous concept. I mean, it's one that I've said to people forever. You know, take what you know, take what you love. You don't have to leave everything behind like it was garbage, because it's not. There's so much good there. And then reaching out more towards the nature aspects of thinking of spirituality and pulling those in, and use what you love, use what makes you happy and fills you up. So there's no reason why. I mean, I think I first came to paganism through voodoo, actually, you know, visiting New Orleans and seeing how they could take their saints, right, and mask them a little bit as their Loa, so they could have both the best worlds and still get along with their masters and so forth. I was very inspired by that. And by digging into learning more about voodooism, I branched out and said, oh, look at this. There's a whole world of witchcraft out here. I've been hiding under a rock and I didn't even know it. So that was really like a good 10 years of exploring every facet. You know, like James said, you've got your traditional, your folk, and then I guess I'm kind of blended, because I picked off the apple tree all the great bits that I thought would work for me. And that's what I would say to other people too. Please don't feel like you're leaving behind the good stuff. Take it with you and let it help you grow as you learn these new things. You're going to find stuff in the new things that you probably don't like either. Just take what you need. So,
James, where does the concept of magic blend in with, let's say, the Catholic Bible?
Well, it's a big gulf, really, within Catholicism between what it currently teaches and what it teaches pre-1800s. Because historically, across the world, Catholicism was completely okay with the idea that there are varied spiritual powers. The term angel is very broad. In the book of Revelations to Esdras Jubilees, you have angels of forests, of elements, of water. And that was all part of traditional Catholic belief. And there was also the strong belief that you had occult properties in natural things, such as crystals, herbs, and stars. And you had the belief in the correspondences and sympathies too. You can also see this in the Bible. There's a lovely passage I like, Wisdom of Solomon 7:17 to 22. I should have it memorized by now. When it goes on saying all the virtues of herbs and stars and the powers of spirits and the directions, and says that all of this is the creation of God. And for years, that was the basic Catholic belief, that occult powers in natural things put there by God and using them is no more offensive than having a bath or eating food. It's equally natural. I mean, someone would probably pop up and say, oh, well, you can use them for sin. Well, you can use anything for sin if you put your mind to it. It doesn't mean that God's own creation, which he calls very good, has anything flawed in it. So by that logic, to my understanding, if someone is just using the harmless properties of nature, they're only doing what countless generations of Catholics have done before them. So there's a very strong blend on that side of things, where you can just straight up do it. And then if you dig into the grimoire tradition, you'll find something else, because there's often a mistake made in today's Christians where they think, oh, well, if they were doing magic, they had to have been less Christian. But if you read the grimoires and the manuals, they are very pious people, and they saw Christ as the word, the resounding resonance of the Father's command to be, through which all these things were made, as the inventor of magic. And they thought that by doing magic, it was a sacramental act that could let them get closer to him, to understand more about him through creation, and to grow in their own deification. So improve themselves as people to the extent of being united with God, which is a normal part of Christianity, where you grow into the God-man concept and are saved, i.e. divinified. But they used magic to do it. So there's two main ways. You have either what people would call the low magic way, although I don't like the term at all, of just doing magic because you can. And then there's what others would call the high magic way of doing magic as a pillar of your Catholicism. And most do both, to be honest. But those are the two main ways it can happen.
So one thing that we discussed basically on your page, I may have posted it in the past, is when Jesus came, basically what they consider the Old Testament kind of went out the water, out the window. Okay. And a lot of people, I believe, don't follow the Catholic religion because of the Old Testament compared to the New Testament. You want to explain a little bit of difference in both?
Well, the old basic Christianity teaching on this is that the law was fulfilled by Jesus because it ran on this endless system of atoning animal sacrifice. And now we have an infinite sacrifice. It's not so much dead as it is completely abrogated. No Christian per Acts 15 has ever been under any of the written laws in the first 5 books of the Bible. So that's Genesis, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, Exodus. None of the laws in there, like you shall not eat shellfish, don't blend fabrics, and don't do divination, although the translation's a bit screwy on that one. None of them apply anymore. So if someone looks at them and says, well, I can't support this because this is what you preach, it's not. And we do find that a lot with magic groups, because there's one verse in particular that in English is translated with all kinds of broad brush terms. I think it's Deuteronomy 18:10-12, the one that goes, don't be a medium, spiritist, or do divination. That doesn't apply to us, because the immediate verse beforehand says it's only the practices of those nations. So to summarize, it'd be Old Testament laws made for a particular time and place for Israel. Their intention was to keep the nation consecrated to God so they could deliver the Messiah. But now, under the new covenant of grace, we don't have to follow them. So they're essentially a means of securing the Israelite covenant, which no longer apply. The eternal character of things like the Ten Commandments, that still applies, but the laws themselves, no. So a lot of the things people come in and say, well, a Christian can't do this because it says here in Exodus, it also says to pay your workers daily. And if you don't do that, you're not following it. So don't quote it to us, kind of thing. There's a big misunderstanding there in Christianity itself, I think.
The amazing thing is, it's actually in the promised powers of the Holy Spirit is, as Paul said, all the things that from prophecies to me, which is like readings, knowledge, internal spiritual knowledge. That's how I, describe an old soul, is they have internal spiritual knowledge. All of a sudden, discussions come from, where did that come from? Okay, it's just internal knowledge. Is there, and then we'll get on some of the other questions, is there any, we know the Catholic Church is, and that's why I love it, it's rituals, okay, when they have Mass. Is there any practice as far as Mass goes that would, is there a division at Catholic Church that would fall under this as a practice in any country?
There used to be. I'm not so sure about now. I mean, you do have one thing people don't really know or understand about the Catholic Church is that its practices will change depending on culture. So for certain things like ancestor worship, yes, you can flat out go to a Mass in, say, Vietnam, Singapore, Korea, and they have already incorporated ancestor veneration as part of the Mass. Like in Singapore, the Archdiocese said, well, you know what, if you have this ancestor cult, we think they're holy souls in purgatory. Let's put a table to them here, and there you go, off you go on your own way. You get specific things like that. But mostly it's a historic thing. See, Mass itself is an example of theurgy, where you will invoke a deity into yourself in the hopes of becoming the deity. It's a central concept to the gospel itself. I think Jesus goes on most specifically in John 17, where he says, make them what I am. So we're bringing people into union with the Godhead. Mass is an example of that. And in the old tradition of Catholic magic, you'll often find in the grimoires and the manuals and the purification rites beforehand, they would say, go to Mass because you need the ability in order to do this operation. And they would also use Mass to bless their tools. Say if a piece of crystal or an enchanted ring that was meant to help fight epilepsy had lost its virtue, the power innate to the stone, they would have a mass said over it with the purifying blood and herbs from the book of Leviticus, and they would consider that to be restoring the virtue to the stone. So nowadays there's a lot less, unless you take it from the theurgy angle, but historically there is a big role that the Catholic Church plays in the magic of its members. And I think sacramentals, things like holy water, blessed salt, they're survivals of that. Because obviously before the Catholic Church came around, people believed that these items had power themselves. The Catholic Church added the belief that people could also put power into them. I'm not sure how original the idea was, but it was something we added to the general practice. And years ago, we'd bless everything. I mean, priests still do it in places like Mexico. They'll bless your cars, they'll bless your drink, they'll bless your fields. And years ago, the average Catholic would walk around doing that because it was just something we believed we could do. And a lot of those sacramental blessings that they used made their way into charm books after the Reformation. So the stuff that cunning folk would traditionally do, especially the things where it's obvious, they make the sign of the cross as part of the ritual. That all comes from historic Catholic leanings of magic within the church itself. But it was largely drummed out over the last 200 years. Until living memory, you had cunning folk who'd work closely with priests. But in Europe, at least, it's not the same elsewhere in the world. The Ethiopian church still has magical practitioners within the order. But within Europe, all of that's sadly gone, apart from the theurgy of the Mass itself.
I got two questions, and then
Okay.
we'll go on to your questions. How old are you? You got some 26. How did you
Mhm.
gain all this knowledge? In yeah, I mean,
don't
it's
really-
like the memory's fantastic. I mean, geez.
It's a long story because I wasn't raised religious. So I converted about 3 years ago. Before that, I was a very lazy agnostic. Like I turned to God as a kind of genie. And once in desperation, it's a series of miracles, really. Like once I fasted for 3 days on a whim, not knowing if God was real, saying if I pass this test, then I won't eat for 3 days. I passed by 1 mark. Now that was a bit of a wake-up call. I ignored it for the next 2 years. And then I was using holy water to try and heal my girlfriend's scars on her stomach. Because I thought, well, it's worth a punt. And it didn't. So I thought, well, you know what? After pouring it on for 10 minutes, I thought, this isn't working. Most of the water's gone. So I turned to put the lid back on the bottle. But it was full. The bottle was full. And that, since then, I've just hit the books massively, really. Because it was a big wake-up call saying, okay, there is something actually real. I don't know precisely what it is. I wouldn't know that until I went on a pilgrimage later. But that was when I really hit the books and I just absorbed so much. I'm not sure how it's happened because I don't actually read that much. It's just the connections between one thing I read and another will just spin and spin until there's a string of words that I can give people if they
No,
ask.
I'm just super impressed. I know you're young. I know you were in your 20s, but the way that your knowledge and I think Annette would agree with me because she's that way with her beliefs, is amazing. Okay, it's like
Thank you.
you must have been night and day studying or reading. Let's put it that way, and you comprehend very well too. What books? Now, I know with the Christians compared to the Catholics, were there books pulled out of the original Catholic Bible?
There's a lot of disagreement on the Bible itself and what books should be in it. So if you spoke to another ancient venerable church, say the Ethiopian Tewahedo Church, they would say yes, because they have a lot of books, such as the Josephon and I think 4 Maccabees. No, that's the Slavonic church, my mistake. There's several churches who would say, yes, you've taken this out, we have this, why don't you? But within Catholicism itself, since the Canon of Melito of Sardis in the middle of the 100s, through Athanasius's Festal letter, which is considered the first incarnation of the full canon in the 350s, up to the present day, no book's been removed. Some have reappeared after disappearing. So Wisdom of Solomon's one of those. It wasn't in the original Melito canon, but it is here now. But the things that people often say were removed, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, those weren't so much taken out of the Catholic canon. They were never in it. And Gnosticism's a separate approach to Christianity. There's a lot of Gnostics in the Catholic, which is true. And they tend to believe that these things were taken out of the Catholic canon. So they then attach them to what they understand of Catholicism. And having looked into Gnosticism as well, there's a lovely course on the Great Courses website which covers it in much detail. I don't think that's the right way to go about it, because Gnostics, it's essentially not very different to Catholicism, because the overall theme of a false god of this world in Catholicism, that's Satan, preventing you from accessing the true creator God. That theme is the same, but within Gnosticism, they have a much more complicated mythology. And the true creator God isn't the God of the Old Testament in many Gnostic sects. And I think if someone looks into the books that were removed from the Bible, that allegedly removed from the Bible, without understanding that's a very different Christianity, then they're probably going to end up confused and not get the most out of either teaching. So I do, in the group, that's a point I try and be clear on when it comes up as much as I can. I don't want to be rude, but I think if you're going to be a Gnostic, it's something that you appreciate was developed separately from mainstream Catholicism, because the books weren't in the canon as is. There's very strong differences between them, even though the essential premise is the same.
What books are best for a Christian interested in magic to start with?
Well, the one I'd recommend with, I don't want to be too corny and recommend the Bible. I'll explain my reasoning that a bit later, because it's so many other things. But the one I'd recommend starting with is the 3 books of occult philosophy by Heinrich Agrippa. Now, Agrippa himself, Cornelius Agrippa, I'm not sure what his first name was, it varies. He's probably the best Catholic occultist of all time. So he's the one who was mostly influential in inspiring the movements that led on to contemporary Wicca as such, in a roundabout way. A lot of the things you'll see in modern Wiccan books come from the 3 books of occult philosophy. Now, it's a big encyclopedia, absolutely everything you could ask, from candle colors to what ghosts are, to how to summon demons and do necromancy. It's all there in the 3 books of occult philosophy by Agrippa. And you can read them for free online. The Gutenberg file is very old English. It's quite hard to get into, but it is really good. And number 2 of the main 3 I recommend, I'm going to keep this list as short as I can. Number 2 of the main 3 would be Meditations on the Tarot. It's supposed to be anonymous. It's really by Valentin Tomberg. Like, he's quite obviously the author. He's a 20th century Catholic mystic who converted from various Hermetic orders, I believe. And in the Meditations of the Tarot, he uses the 27 major arcana of the tarot deck as symbolic meditations on magic, Hermeticism generally. But he sees Jesus Christ, as a lot of old grimoire magicians do, as the center of the magical world, as literally the rock, the foundation, the God-man, the means to an end of making it into something more than human. And he approaches the whole thing, tarot in light of Hermetica, from that angle. And it's very good to weave together what you may have seen as separate from Catholicism, Hermeticism, magic, and bring them all together into one. And it also has the recommendation of a cardinal, which is good for bringing up if your Catholic friends are like, well, how do you do magic? Well, Cardinal von Balthasar approved this book. That's the first time I've pronounced his name correctly in my life. And number 3, what would number 3 be? This is a tricky one. Number 3, Testament of Solomon, I'd say. Not because most magic practitioners will find it useful, but because it's the earliest outgrowth of what would later be known as the Solomonic corpus. So King Solomon himself, assuming the legends are true, probably the most influential occultist of all time, explicitly a biblical figure. The legends of him having wisdom to command demons are an outgrowth of the ability that his exorcistic psalms could control demons. So the entirety of Solomonic corpus grew. It's grown a long way, but it grew from that biblical seed. And Testament of Solomon, which explains how a conjurer can, using holy names and symbols, control demons that associate with certain styles and effects in the world, is really the first time we see that in a kind of Christo-Jewish context. It's uncertain which one the book actually is. And I would call that the first Christian grimoire. I'm in favor of an early date for it, around 200 AD. And I think that's the first Christian grimoire. It won't be very useful for most people unless they go into conjuring, but definitely well worth a read, just so people realize, wait, this is a thing. This is an actual Christian book of magic. And then they go into the 3 books, and then the whole world opens up for them. Because there are thousands of medieval grimoires. I could sit here all day talking about them.
Okay. Annette, you have any questions for James?
No, this is bringing up a lot of things that I studied way too long ago. I got to go in my library and dig up some good stuff now.
All right. Let me put on the glasses because I have some questions here. Where do pagans' gods fit?
Mm, that's a good one.
James?
Oh, me? No.
Yes. Where do
I thought you were
pagan
talking to Annette. I
gods?
heard the
No,
word
no,
pagan.
no,
And,
no.
right.
Where do pagan gods fit?
Ah, well, that's an interesting question. I think it's one I recommended, actually.
Yes.
There's another underrated feature of Christianity that doesn't really come through is the fact that its cosmology, what it says about what gods there are, isn't very different from pagan gods traditionally. Because in ancient paganism, and still in a lot of paganism today, you have this idea of a more distant creator god who can't be directly accessed. And there are intercessory spirits lower than him, and we revere those. But in Christianity, we think that we have a more full revelation of the distant creator God, the source, the being in itself. And we think that while we can still venerate helpful spirits loyal to him, we can also worship the creator God as well. So the trick, therefore, when it comes to pagan gods, is working out which is loyal and which isn't. Because the term pagan god itself doesn't tell us that. It only says pagans worship something, and that in itself doesn't mean that these spirits aren't loyal. It just means that we have to use our discernment. Because you have some, for example, to pick a local example, one I've worked with in the past, you have spirits of places, for example, like Verbea. She's the spirit of a river god up in York who reached out to me. She's objectively a pagan god. She had a cult of sacrifice in Roman times. She had a cult of the head, and people went to her for miraculous healing. But as a spirit of a place, she's only doing her job according to Jubilees 2:2. There's an angel above her. The angel reports to the divine council from Psalm 82. And it's all this order. So a lot of pagan gods are actually spirits just doing their job. And there's nothing wrong with venerating them as helpers, because as it says in the book of Hebrews, are these not our ministering spirits here to help our salvation? We can work with them. But then, of course, you do have the risk that there are some who are, in a pagan understanding, just hostile and nasty, or in a Christian understanding, actively rebelling against what we consider to be the source of good. And while there might be nothing practically wrong with working on them, for a Christian, it does pose the difficulty of setting aside our transcendental path in order to reach out to the God-man. There's a road, and they can be taken as variations off of it that can either slow you down or stun you completely. But you could say that about anything, really, to be honest. So I think it's just mostly a case of do your research on the divine council if you want to work with pagan gods as a Christian, because there is a lot of scope for it. There really is. But don't be too enthusiastic. If you get any kind of sense that something isn't right with a particular deity, or that where it's leading you is somewhere that it probably can't back up if you were to conjure it to tell you the truth, for instance, that's probably not something many people can do, but it takes a lot of theurgy, and I can't do that. It takes a lot of inner work to be able to do that clearly and accurately. If there's a sense that a pagan god that you're working with isn't leading you toward transcendental good, don't follow it. If it is, and you are very confident in its position in the hierarchy according to the divine council, then you can. But if not, I would recommend not to.
Okay.
Follow
How-
your instincts.
And that's done.
How can someone learn spiritual skills? That's one of your questions that you feel that people might be interested in.
Well, if you ask it normally, this is actually the reason I thought this would be a good question, because if you ask it in many groups, they'll give you a massive ton of books. Now, I like books, but they're not the most practical thing. I think if someone's starting out, they should, first of all, try to see divinity within themselves. Well, that can be a hard task to begin with. But it's said in, I believe it's the Epistle of James, listening to the word of God, aka Christ within Scripture, or himself if you have access to Mass. Listening to the word of God is like seeing our reflection. And that's a really interesting turn of phrase to me, because it reminds us that the word is actually a physical thing. It's through the word that things come to be. And if you can find or accept the existence of the word within yourself, that's your bedrock. That's where you begin spiritual skills. And then you can begin in the world around you before you open a book. You can train yourself to see beauty in little things, in the way angles operate, for instance, or in a celebrity crush even. You can give yourself this sense of veneration for truth as its own end, because that's also divine. you can see these shards of divinity in the world around you, and then you begin to become much better at seeing them instinctively, and you form this picture of, wait, you're actually in the dream, the mind, the wisdom of a Godhead. And then you build the implicit trust, the faith that Jesus talks about, where you realize you're in the Godhead. And of course it will do what you would want or ask, because if you have done the inner work to realize the Godhead within yourself, it's what's prompting you to ask that. It's a feedback loop that you grow to appreciate. If you first find divinity within yourself, listening to the word of God is like looking at our reflection, and then seeing that outwardly in the world as well. Then you grow in the trust, and then you are able to reach out with confidence. I have a number of practical tips, a number of other practical tips as well. Like one that I especially like, it comes from, oh, hang on, a book I have here, actually. It's a bit dusty, The Occult by Colin Wilson. Now, the essential thesis he makes, and I do think Jesus makes the same point when he says we are gods, is that humans have natural paranormal abilities. Faculty X, he calls them. You have a lot of other occult authors like Rudolf Steiner saying the same thing, but he grounds it all in evolutionary psychology. So he'll say these are things we evolved as hunter-gatherers, and to grow them, we need to live more as a hunter-gatherer would, but not necessarily ditching everything, as Jesus and other great mystics did. I don't think they knew quite why they did that at the time, but that's something they did. Instead of ditching things, we make more marginal lifestyle choices. So on practical terms, it's something I've used to get people up to speed with ghost investigation quite quickly. So just say, they come to me and be like, how can I learn to do this? And I'll be like, here's £10. If you can go out and get everyone in the group a meal, a big meal for £10, you know how it's done. And they'll be like, what the hell are you on about? But once they've done it several times, they've realized they had these instincts to where to find that and how to do that they weren't aware they had. And then if you kind of reduce the amount, or you just decide to go off on a night walk and then try and find your way back, like only somewhere like reasonably local, without knowing the way, you'll realize you have these instincts you weren't aware of before. And it can seem very pointless at first. I've had a lot of people who join my ghost investigation team just turn around and say, nah, this is useless. I prefer to read books, thanks. But the ones who stuck with it, they realize that they do have that faculty X because they are in the mind of a Godhead. They can reach out to things anywhere in the world if they're good enough, or if they're dissolved enough in the notion that they have the divinity within them, because there's no intrinsic separation. We are all within the mind or the dream of a deity. And that's a good way to get to know it, both in a theoretical sense and a practical sense. I'm not sure how much sense I made there. I was bouncing between topics.
Oh, you made, to me, a lot of sense, for the simple fact, I say to people, if I pick up they're an old soul, the way I do it, I say, that means you have internal spiritual knowledge. A young soul is an individual that needs proof and everything else. Where an old soul, and you brought up the paranormal investigation, walks into a place and can sense the energy and everything else. Okay, where a young soul, needs the gadgets and tools and stuff like that. So, yeah, very interesting you brought that up. Found it interesting that you're in the paranormal too. But the two are kind of tied together, and people, I've said in the past, and Annette can agree with this, is I firmly believe the reason why a lot of people are having spiritual experiences, paranormal experiences, is because finally people need to know that there's a spiritual world out there. And humans as a nature needs it slapped in the face to realize it. And that's why I believe there's more and more and more knowledge coming out as far as paranormal experiences go. So we would like, Annette, any questions for James? Are you enjoying this, Annette?
I am. It's been a long time since we had a good conversation like this.
Yeah, and James, would you be willing to come on in the future?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yes, I enjoy this. And Catholic Witches can be found on Facebook. Just tap it in there. Is there a website? Is there a website pertaining to it?
There's not. I was thinking of setting one up on Squarespace. I just haven't got around to it yet. once it hits the magic 2,000 members. That's my bribe to the viewers.
Okay.
If you join and it gets to 2,000, we're nearly there. I'll make a Squarespace website. I'll be thinking of starting a blog as well anyway. So
well, maybe
I'm gonna
this
do
will
that anyway.
maybe this will help bring it through the numbers. And I know there used to be, I don't know if it still exists, there used to be a website called Catholic Craft, okay, which is never had a guest on, but I knew it exists. And we'd like to have you back on. Let me ask you a question. I don't know how far deep you go into this. Knowledge-wise, yeah. I posted on Catholic Witches if anybody had anything that they wanted us to respond to, okay? Post it. You had one lady, her name is Rose Marie. And
I think I saw this.
yeah, and
Yeah.
she definitely is in a situation that she needs help and prayers and stuff like that for. So anybody listening to this, let's make that wish in thought for Miss Rosemarie, and both financially and medically, that she finds some relief for what she needs. Okay, so and I think in the future I would love to bring this live on Facebook. Annette, what do you think? I mean, we have the Zoom possibility. We haven't done it before. I'll probably do it in the future. First, before I bring you on, James, and you got a bunch of people turn in and there ain't nothing. So make sure it works. Any final words you want to leave with, James?
Only one thing, actually. I'm going to try and keep this short. It's mostly in case there's Christians watching thinking, oh, well, you can't do magic because it's against God. The one thing I would ask them to do is read Wisdom of Solomon 7:17-22. Because everything I say it's just nothing by comparison. That's the word itself saying it's fine. I can't add to that. Just read that if you're wondering if there's any biblical basis. The rest will fall into place. It just will. Okay.
And I got to say on Catholic Witches on Facebook, great articles that you put out there. A lot of knowledge. An article per article could be a show in itself. So James does put a lot of work into trying to educate people, trying to let people know that there is magic in the faith, and we all can create some type of miracle for ourselves or loved ones around us. So I firmly believe in that. James, thank you.
More than welcome.
And
have a good day, guys.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye. Yes, listeners, that was a very interesting and enjoyable, I must say, guest, Mr. James Austin of Catholic Witches. Annette, you being a pagan and everything you've heard, what was your impression? You were smiling a lot, so.
It was a wonderful interview. James has a lot to offer. He's a young man who's got a long life ahead of him, sharing and helping people through their transitions, if you think of it that way, because most of us grow up most Catholics or Christians grow up in a household with that. It's not something that we choose on our own when we're old enough to make a decision about. So as we grow up and we start to see other forms of spirituality, potentially that we can use for ourselves, we have a little feeling like, I can't do that magic, or I can't try that other kind of ritual because I'm a Catholic and that goes against what I've been told. So it's very freeing to have someone like James be able to say, wait a minute, there are words that give us, that allow us to be able to do magic and not have the guilt of, I'm going against God. That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's providing a wonderful opportunity for people to feel more comfortable in their new skins and grow, and anything that brings people to earth, back to the spirits of the earth, is amazing, because we need a whole lot more of that in the world. Otherwise, we're going to lose the earth and all its spirits. So I feel like he's doing a wonderful contribution to the community overall by being there as a beacon to people to, hey, you're not the only one. Let me answer some of your questions, make you feel more comfortable as you move forward in your new spirituality.
And I believe that this will, as I said in the past, when I'm doing readings and I bring this up, if the person says they're Catholic or they've pulled away from the Catholic Church and that, I bring this up and boom, I know there's a few people that have, joined their page, Catholic Witches. And the knowledge there is fantastic. So, and we'll have James on in the future and possibly do it live, which is going to be interesting. And Annette, thank you.
Of course. Thank you for bringing this gentleman on. It was wonderful.
Yeah, our next show will be, or is planned to be on conspiracies and being reality. And we'll take it from there. Annette, well, let me say one thing too, folks. If you're interested, Annette and I do work together as far as doing house parties and stuff like that. Okay. And I'm doing phone readings, cool, private readings, and house parties myself. So willing to travel. So remember that. Enjoy the coming weeks. Easter, matter of fact, boy, that's coming up too. What a great time. What a great time tie-in, okay, with the show. So thank you, listeners, viewers. Annette, thank you for being here. I may take a nap, but no, I got plenty.
Good morning, good night.
No, I got plenty of work to do. So thank you, folks.
Bye,
Enjoy.
everybody. Blessed be.
Until next time, bye-bye.